welcome to the Astranti analysis of the November 2019 MCS sitting on GSC Sportswear. So, the first thing I need to do straight off the bat is to introduce myself. So I'll do that very briefly now. Hello there and welcome to the MCS pre-scene analysis. Now, this is just an intro clip to introduce you to what the product range actually is and sort of, the contextual factors so that you can have the utmost confidence in the process for your exam success. So the first thing is that my name is Joseph and I am the MCS expert at Astranti. I write mocks for the MCS as well as offering tutor responses to any MCS queries as well as F3 queries, and I also write portions of our study text in regards to the MCS and F3. So that is my sort of background. I've been working with the MCS for around 2.5 years now. It's quite a few sittings so far, and I've had a lot of sort of knowledge around this kind of level for a number of years now before I took over as the MCS expert at Astranti. So you can find sort of sneak previews and video clips surrounding the MCS and exam success in the case study at my Facebook page, which is sort of shown at the bottom. If you search that, you will find all kinds of clips on a weekly basis regarding the MCS, even when there isn't a pre-scene around yet. We look at some examiners' reports. Okay, so besides that, what actually is the pre-scene? Well, it's a video series first and foremost in this analysis. We go section by section, covering each page in as much detail as you'll ever be required to do. It's very speculation based, but ultimately we're using our P2 and E2 theory in sort of the page, like the wordy sections of the pre-scene to pull out all the relevant points, as well as applying F2 to our numerical information in the financial section. So the key points: industry guidance and how that relates to the company, and also we apply the business models. This is done mostly in the strategic analysis, but there will be mention in each section when it's particularly relevant. We talk about extensively the likely exam issues based on applying all this theory as we go through. So there will be hints to you and sort of key focus points for you to pick up on as we go through. There's also, these sort of standout exam hints and tips that we do come across. Like there are some that we're speculating on, and there are others that are just huge indicators that I will 100% point out to you, sort of the given questions that will definitely turn up in one of the variants. And potentially that variant is yours. We then have the strategic analysis, which is a very focused business model to pre-scene sort of video and presentation. And we have the top 10 most likely issues, which follows up all this information with essentially the top 10 problems that are likely to come up in the exam, with the top 1 to 4 being almost a guarantee that they will be, definitely there. We have a pretty good success rate. I believe in the past 5 sittings, we have scored about 7.5 correct issues in the majority of the different variants. So with that in mind, you can have a lot of confidence in our sort of guesswork and speculation. And then there's the other ones near the top of that list, which are basically guaranteed to come up. So how is it going to work? We'll go section by section. We'll assume that there's no knowledge as I progress. So by that I mean you haven't pre-read the pre-scene. We'll be going through together as it was our first reading. If you've already read it, great. But I will assume that you have not read further on at any given point. The only thing I will assume is that you're relatively well versed in our F2, P2 and E2 modules, at least enough to be able to go back and revise a topic if we mention that it's particularly relevant. What I suggest throughout this series is that you read a section and make notes just before you watch it, or just after you watch the section, and this will mean that you can compare and contrast with my speculations and sort of inputs, and this will give you the biggest and most well-rounded exam prep you can possibly get. So very much go with that. It's very, very useful. And as we go through, of course, I'll have my review. At each video end, I will sort of sum up to the best of my ability what we've covered and why it's important. And of course, the last two products, we'll be going through a full strategic analysis and the top 10 issues, which are pretty straightforward as we discussed in the previous slide. So, without further ado, you will now cut to the current MCS pre-scene for you to get stuck in with. And with that said, I'm going to begin by going through what exactly we're going to cover. So the first video is going to cover the first few pages. We're going to go through the background to the sportswear industry. So we're going to do page 3 through to 4, and probably look at 5, because we're going to do 6 total videos on this pre-scene, which will average out at about 4 to 5 pages, maybe 6 per video, depending on how neatly it breaks down. And we'll go through chronologically, as you will see, until the financials. It's just a tradition that we do the financials in video 6, so you will see me go through all the content up to the financials on page, I believe, 16, and then we will go through to that bit, then skip ahead to the parts after the financials. So that is page 18, the financials, and then the final video will be on the financials, and we'll go through all the percentage changes, the raw percentage changes, the relative percentage changes, stuff like that, and discuss the different ratios. So before we get to that stage, let's begin with the very first page. Now, you might be thinking, this is just a short intro page to the pre-scene. I'll just read over this and, see what it says. And you'd be right in thinking that it is an introduction page. However, we often say at Astranti that the pre-scene is the context for the exam, but this page is the context for the entire pre-scene. So actually, we get a lot from this very small page compared to even some of the very long, in-depth pages, because this is just crammed full of interesting information. So the first thing we get to see is that we are a finance manager working for GSC PLC, which will be referred to as just GSC. Now, I do apologize in advance. I have a feeling I'm going to find GSC consistently difficult to say once I can't start saying it a lot. So if I call it GCS or something like that, I apologize. But the first thing straight away we can see is that GSC is a PLC. That is to say, they are a public limited company, and this means that they have been listed on the stock exchange. So that means they have to adhere to all the regulations of the stock exchange. They have to pay a fee to be on the stock market. They also have to have a swathe of different corporate governance rules. They have to have some non-executive directors, remuneration committees, stuff like that. So there's a lot we can bring in straight away from that first sentence. And let's not forget that we are a finance manager. So typically our main responsibilities will be in the finance function, though I'm sure that will be clarified later on in this page. So with that said, GSC are going to have to disclose a lot of information as well, which could actually lead them to losing some competitive advantage to any unlisted competitors, because they will have a better idea of what GSC might be planning depending on the information disclosed, for example. So that is something to consider. We'll have to keep it throughout our analysis here, because being listed is quite a significant part. It means that actually we don't have this big red equity finance button, which sometimes we do have in the other MCS pre-scenes that have come before, because sometimes we could say, but they could just list on the stock exchange and that would get them loads of money to do XYZ, acquire this company. This is not an option, but it does open up options such as debentures, for example, on the capital markets. They've got the opportunity to do rights issues. So with that in mind, a stock listing has that really key part to our financing and how we move forward, and also some of our governance aspects and our competitive advantage aspects. So moving on now, before I rave on too much about such a simple sentence, we are going to see that they are a global business, so multinational, again, as you might expect with a listed company, but it is noteworthy because that will mean exchange rate risk potentially. We don't know for sure what the different currencies they're dealing with yet, but I imagine, based on them being global, they're going to have to mitigate the risks of things like exchange rate risk, translation risks, which are going to be the movement of exchange rates between a transaction agreed and settled, for example. But also we have to consider that there's going to be a global supply chain as well, which will have its difficulties. So they design, market and sell high performance branded sportswear. So with this in mind, they are going to be needing high quality. And that brings about the P2 aspects of, are we using the balanced scorecard to measure our quality? Because quality is not something that's purely numerical. It's not quantitative and it's not simple. There's a lot of inspections involved, making sure it's all the right kind of specifications, the right quality of material. All the different things you can think of as far as quality is concerned, they're all qualitative. They're not something you can just tick a box in terms of numbers. So with that in mind, we need something that incorporates a performance measurement system throughout our business that inherently looks at the non-financial. That is our balanced scorecard from P2. And just before we move away from this global aspect, which we've just discussed, there is the question mark of transfer pricing. Now, it's not covered heavily at the F2 level, but it is good to just know that as a global business, as a group, you're going to need to charge your subsidiaries the same market price. You can't offer an extremely cheap price because that would be unfair based on the different market regulators. So transfer pricing is going to be quite essential in terms of just knowing that we've got to be ethical and transparent with our inter-subsidiary, inter-unit transactions. So for example, if GSC have their own factories making the fabrics and then they sell them to the parent company for the manufacture of the actual garments, well then that needs to be priced accordingly as per the market, rather than just deciding a super cheap price, because that would be favoring the parent too much. Now, with this said, we're going to move on now to see that they do a clothing range, footwear and sports accessories. So they've got quite a broad product category. That means they're going to have a lot of suppliers for the different materials needed. They might even have, third parties that are actually making the items for them based on a design. So we'll have to see as that moves forward. But that does bring about this idea that we have a really big need for quality, but also we have a large number of products, which increases the likelihood of having a few issues here and there. And that will have to do with a lot of our production. So maybe just in time, is that actually worthwhile for this company? Is it not? That will depend on the supply chain and how that works moving forward. So we'll probably get into more depth on that in future. But it is, again, worth noting. GSC are based in the North American country of Geoland. So this is a made-up country, but we know we are in the continent of North America, which is where many of the sportswear companies are based. And this means we're going to be in a very highly competitive domestic market, which explains also why we're global. Because I imagine in such a competitive market, you're going to want to seek quite quickly alternative markets to sell your goods. So with that in mind, it all kind of adds up there, but it also brings about this idea that we're in an affluent continent, very interconnected, very much, trendy with social media, all these things which will help maybe our marketing strategy. From the industry pack you may have seen already, the industry is very much big on social media marketing, influencers, sponsorships, stuff like that, but we will get to that. So Geoland has a population of over 200 million, so very highly populated, loads of customers to sell to, and have a highly developed economy. So considering this, we're going to be in a situation of optimal conditions to do business. That's essentially what this is just reaffirming for us. It's nothing to write home about too much. It just means we have a large customer base, in our domestic market, and the economy being very highly developed means that there's going to be people in the sort of price, or rather wage ranges, or sort of living standards that can afford these high performance, high quality sportswear garments. So the people of Geoland have a keen interest in a wide range of health and fitness activities. So again, we have a pretty big core demographic in our domestic market. Again, this is CIMA reaffirming to us that there's not going to be any demand problems in our domestic market. They like us to think about the broader picture rather than having these sort of small worries about maybe the domestic market collapsing. They're very clearly stating here that it will not be a problem, and we're going to be focusing our attention mainly on how our global business works, because it's a global group entity and we don't have to worry too much about the ability of the domestic market to demand the goods. We simply have to meet our products, GSC's products, with the demand that's being shown by our domestic market. So with that said, CIMA have mentioned that Geoland is home to some of the most famous sports teams and sports stars. So this is essentially modelled off the United States. Obviously has, I think, quite a few less people than the United States, but they're explicitly pertaining to this idea of having maybe some basketball stars, big teams in the NBA, what's the other one? National Baseball League. All these things are going to be present in Geoland. So what they're saying is it's a hub of sport, lots of sports personalities, stars and teams. So it's going to mirror our sort of North American, or United States rather, market for sporting goods, which is very, very interesting for us to think about, because there is this huge bidding war for the different influencers and sports stars, which I imagine, based on this mention, that we're going to see more on in the future. That's pretty seen. And also it says that 2 of the world's largest sportswear businesses are also based in Geoland. So our domestic competition and probably our global competition are also headquartered in Geoland. And that is, something to consider. It's very problematic in the sense of we have to try and outcompete with the largest brands in the world, which can be a challenge, of course. So there is a high competitive force in Geoland and probably in many other markets that GSC are a part of. So bringing that all together, we have optimal conditions in our local economy. However, there's a lot of competition, and there's going to be, a lot of opportunities to have these big bidding wars with other rival companies for sponsorships of sports teams, sports stars. Getting that brand recognition is going to be both easy in terms of there being all the opportunity, but difficult in the sense that there's going to be a lot of competition for that opportunity. So we have to keep that competitive environment in mind. And in this sort of sphere of things, we're going to think about mostly Porter's five forces here. The competitive sphere, or force rather, in Geoland is going to be very, very high. And this is something to consider as we move forward, because obviously if the forces are very, very high in all categories of Porter's 5 forces, then there's going to be a low profitability. So we'll have to see how that shakes out when we actually get to our strategic analysis video. But for now, we can point out that the force of competition is particularly high. Hello, it's me again. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to first extend my hope that you enjoyed the free sample that you've just viewed, but also to just sort of explain what else a strategy do to help you pass your exams really effectively, provided you found our sample particularly interesting and insightful, of course. So, of course, we have a study text for every module, ranging from P1 to F3, and the certificate level is also free on our website. So we have study texts throughout the CIMA course, every module you could hope to study. The certificate level are free, as I mentioned, and then the rest of them, ranging from P1 to F3, are all available to purchase. Alongside this, if you're not so much a study text kind of student and you prefer a visual way of learning, we have the course videos. We essentially break down the study text into bite-sized presentations with a walkthrough, and it's a very, very, very engaging way of explaining the course. Following this, we have the pre-scene analysis, where we break down each pre-scene sitting into a number of videos, going through the whole document, but also adding a top 10 recommendations for what will come up in the exam, and also a strategic analysis where we put all the models you'd find in E2, for example, to the pre-scene itself, whichever that may be at the time. Alongside this, we provide an industry analysis. This is a document and accompanying video which help you give that contextual information in your exam. So for example, if the pre-scene's on the oil industry, the industry analysis will break down the oil industry, the current topics, trends, issues, what the competitive market looks like, all those kind of aspects, all condensed into one so you can spend your time wisely in your study period. Following on from this, when you actually want to practice all this knowledge, we have mock exams for all of our materials. So StudyText has a generic mock exam based on the module, whereas the pre-scene analysis has mocks available to purchase that are based on that specific pre-scene, that are targeted to the key issues we believe will come up. And if you're not content with just doing those mock exams and practicing that way, we have a marking and feedback system where you can purchase the ability to send in your paper, have it marked by a CIMA qualified accountant, and get personalized feedback on whether you can improve X or Y area. And sort of finally, if you will, if you're feeling really underprepared and that exam is coming really, really soon, the master classes are offered by Astranti, and they're essentially a crash course in anything you could want for that topic. So if it's a master class on the pre-scene, it's going to give you absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about the pre-scene in one really condensed sitting. Likewise, if it was the F3 masterclass, you would have all of F3 gone through in a very crash course style presentation and video link. You can also purchase it post-stream as opposed to viewing it live, all these kind of aspects. We are very, very confident that these materials will help you get the exam success that you want. So we have a pass guarantee. Provided you fill out a form which demonstrates that you have utilized our materials to a large extent and actually taken the time to study them, and you have unfortunately failed, we will offer you the same materials again for the next sitting as a consolidatory offer to ensure that you can get back on the horse and get that exam grade that you want. With that said, thank you very much for watching the sample video. I hope you enjoyed it and it gives you a lot of confidence in Astranti and your CIMA future.